101. Mad-Eye Moody. The isolated county of Little Hangleton had not seen many visitors in decades, but in the past few days, strangers had been arriving one after another. Aurors from the ministry, all stiffly formal, questioned local residents about whether anyone had seen Tom Riddle. In charge of the inquiries was Dolores, the same official who had sent Cyrus to Azkaban over 2 months ago. Cyrus had escaped prison, and even if it wasn't her fault, someone still had to answer questions. With her were several other Aurors, and two figures who looked slightly out of place. Mad-Eye Moody leaned on his cane. His face was uneven and weathered like a toad's. His magical eye protruded from the left socket and whirred and rotated in a way that never failed to unsettle people. Beside him stood a tall young woman with pink hair who kept scuffing at the weeds with her foot, impatient. "Do you really think Tom Riddle would show up in this tiny town?" she asked. "If I'm going to make my first arrest as an Auror, I'd rather be hunting Sirius Black." "First, you're not an Auror yet," Moody snapped, offering her no quarter. "Dumbledore simply asked me to look into this riddle business, which is why you're here." He pushed his cane into the ground. "And Black isn't an ordinary criminal. With your current skills, you'd likely be killed the moment you met him. Don't think a former Death Eater would spare you out of family ties." Tonks pulled a face behind Moody's back. Then she asked, more curious than defiant, "Who exactly is Tom Riddle? I heard he was behind the Chamber of Secrets at Hogwarts. But even so, why would you come out of retirement for that?" "Probably a wraith," Moody muttered through gritted teeth. Dumbledore had not given him a name, but Moody's instincts had already been working. 50 years ago, there had been a model student at Hogwarts named Tom Riddle. He was unusual. Though Muggle-born, he should have been half-blood. And during his school years, he'd won almost every prize. A boy like that should have gone on to great things, but after graduation, he vanished from the magical world as if he had never existed. He was a pebble dropped in a pond, a ripple, and then nothing, no trace. Moody, however, had picked up threads. He'd asked Dumbledore about Riddle and found out the boy had been an orphan. Dumbledore, while keeping you-know-who's true identity concealed, had shared most other facts with Moody. Riddle was a Muggle surname from his father. His mother's name had been lost. Moody had also learned that Riddle was a Parselmouth, the only explanation for how a student could have controlled a basilisk to terrorize Hogwarts. A former senior in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement had once told Moody of a murder case where the killer had spoken Parseltongue too. That clue led Moody to the gaunt old residence. There were strong traces of old magic there, though the person who had left them was long gone. He could not be certain it had been Riddle, so he widened the search and it brought him to Little Hangleton. Moody's gaze slid toward a handsome house on a distant hillside. In the sunlight, the place looked uncanny, like a watcher of the town's 50 years of history. "That used to be Riddle Manor," he said. 50 years ago, a murder happened there. They were all Muggles, so no one paid it much mind, but there might be a link to the later tragedy at the Gaunt place. Dolores returned at that moment with two more Aurors and reported in a clipped, displeased voice, "An outsider did come a few days ago and even bought Riddle Manor, but his face doesn't match the descriptions of Riddle. Maybe he isn't who we're looking for." "Doesn't resemble him?" Moody barked. "Don't forget he's a wizard. Appearances aren't everything." He started limping toward the hillside, leaning on his cane. Tonks hurried after him. Dolores shot him a resentful look and sent the remaining Aurors ahead as well. At the entrance to the grounds stood an old man, frank, weathered, and patient. His eyes were cloudy but steady, as if he had been expecting them. "You've come, sirs," he said. "You knew we'd come?" Moody asked. His magical eye skimmed over Frank. The man's stare was like a frozen lake, and Moody tried to see through whatever lay behind it. The eye could not penetrate the man's mind or reveal altered memories. "The master told me if other guests arrived, I should leave," Frank said, a trace of forlornness in his voice. He was not very sad. He had been given a place to live, but he clearly misunderstood Cyrus's meaning. Cyrus had meant another kind of guest. In truth, it had been Lord Voldemort he'd referred to, and he had urged Frank to go to save the old gardener's life. Frank, however, had taken the word in its plain sense and treated Moody and the others as the guests. "Master? What's his name?" Tonks pressed. He said I could call him Cyrus, or Riddle works too, Frank replied uncertainly. Tonks's eyes lit up. It really is Riddle. Where did he go? I don't know, miss. I'm only a gardener, Frank answered helplessly. He seemed torn between wanting to be helpful and feeling he should be on his way. He thought of gathering his few belongings, but there wasn't much left to collect. Cyrus had already torn down the old wooden shed he'd used to store things, and the objects he had once owned, the crooked kettle, the lamp, had been disposed of. In the end, he pulled on his coat and set off, dragging his decaying frame away from the house and down toward the town, like a man trying to step out from the long shadow of a place that had kept him too long. The trail has gone cold again, Tonks said, frustrated. Let's go inside and search the house first. At the very least, we need to figure out why Riddle bought it and what connection it has to the magical traces left at the gaunt old residence. Moody took a swig from his hip flask, limped to the side, and fished an enchanted quill from his pocket. The quill scratched ink across a sheet of parchment as he composed a letter to Dumbledore. I'll write and see if Albus has any theories about Riddle's intentions, he said. If you find anything, tell me immediately, Tonks urged. Always ordering people around, Dolores muttered, kicking a pebble and watching Moody walk away. Moody was retired, yes, but still feared. Everyone thought he was half mad, full of paranoid tangents. Being bossed by him rubbed Dolores the wrong way. Still, he didn't dare openly defy the old Auror. Moody's reputation for ruthlessness remained intact. He didn't go easy on either enemies or allies. Dolores was grumbling inwardly when a sudden flash caught his eye, like sunlight striking a stained glass, scattering color across the grass. It flared and vanished before he could be sure what he'd seen. His chest tightened, something inside him snapped awake. You two go check the house, he said quickly. I'll take the side. He broke off and hurried toward the spot. He pushed aside a tuft of grass, as if absent-mindedly, but found nothing. Looking up, he spotted a large black and green python slipping away, its scales reflecting the same strange iridescence. Dolores's heart skipped. Tom Riddle was a parcel-mouth. He might very well be using a snake to keep watch. That could be Riddle's informant, and if he followed it, perhaps he would lead him straight to Riddle himself. He followed almost without thinking. Dumbledore's warnings about Riddle were clear, but Dolores's confidence and vanity told him Riddle was probably overrated. He and his classmates had all left Hogwarts with honors. How could he possibly be outmatched by a single escaped prisoner? Wand in hand, he crept after the python, not noticing how effortlessly he drifted away from Riddle Manor and deeper into the jungle. The light dimmed, leaves closed in, and the floor of deadened foliage underfoot grew slick and treacherous. He nearly slipped more than once. Then the python stopped ahead, and Dolores froze, flattening himself against a broad trunk. Sweat beaded on his forehead. For a long, tense stretch, maybe only minutes, he heard nothing but the distant rustle of insects. Then new sounds reached him, footsteps crunching through dead leaves, steadily approaching. Dolores's breath went tight. The footsteps paused, and then a low, rasping hiss filtered through the trees. Sssss, the unmistakable whisper of Parseltongue. It was Riddle. He hadn't left. He'd been using the snake to monitor the area. All of Dolores's little triumphs lined up in his mind. Moody had been distracted, and now the chance to catch Riddle alone had presented itself. He pictured the accolades already, the head of the Auror office bowing to him, promotions, praise. He slowed his breathing and readied his spell. Then he leapt from cover. Stupefy, he bellowed. A crimson jet burst from his wand and slammed into the undergrowth and into a small, smoking pit that had not been there a moment before. The spell missed its mark. There was no Riddle. There was no snake. A hot object suddenly pressed against the back of his head. His wand was wrenched from his fingers in a burst of burning pain. He felt cold all over. Someone was holding a wand to him. "Looking for me?" said a voice so familiar it felt like ice down his spine. Dolores tried to spin and counterattack, but a sharp strike to his hand sent pain flashing up his arm, and his wand flew out of reach. A soft, humorless chuckle sounded beside him. "We meet again, Auror," the voice said. "You've walked into a very obvious trap." "Tom Riddle," Dolores began. "Glad you remember the name," Riddle said as if amused, and his wand flicked. "Imperio." Moody finished his letter and looked up, glancing around for Dolores. He assumed Dolores had gone into the house to search, but Tonks came bounding out of the doorway instead, shaking her head. "This place has ridiculous taste," she said, grinning. "It's not like my dad's at all." Tonks's father had been a Muggle-born wizard who favored a more traditional, slightly old-fashioned aesthetic. This house, by contrast, was filled with modern appliances, even a Sega Saturn, a new console just released this year. "Did you find anything?" "No," Tonks answered. "Dolores might have found something. I saw him run off into the woods like he was chasing something." Moody's jaw tightened. "Why didn't you go after him?" "Huh?" "Dumbledore warned many times that Tom Riddle is dangerous. If Dolores found something, he could already be in trouble. I told you, if you find anything, you must inform me immediately." Moody snapped. "Which way did he go?" he demanded. "We have to move now." Tonks and the two other Aurors all pointed in different directions. "He went into the jungle," Tonks said. "John says he went up to the mountaintop," one of the others replied. Moody felt his temper fray. What sort of Aurors were these? If this were during Voldemort's rise, they might not have lasted a day. At that moment, Dolores walked out of the woods, brushing dead leaves from his coat. "What are you all doing gathered here?" he asked, surprised by the arguing faces. "See, I told you he went into the woods," Tonks said smugly, folding her arms. Dolores's return eased the tension between Tonks and the others, but Moody did not relax. His magical eyes spun once, twice, and then swept Dolores's body with a slow, clinical scan, like a searching flame. "Stop!" Moody barked. Dolores halted, frowning. "What's wrong?" Moody's face had gone drawn with concern. The eye took in Dolores from head to toe, probing through clothing and skin as if it could see into bone and muscle. The old Auror had used that very eye in the last war to pierce disguises and thwart assassination attempts. And now the eye froze on something subtle but unmistakable, a faint, unnatural shimmer around Dolores, a telltale sign of an imperious binding. The old man's expression changed from annoyance to ice-cold alertness in an instant. One heard three. "Looking for the key to Vault 12. You think I'm an imposter?" Dolores's tone made Moody sound almost ridiculous. "You must be mad. Do you really believe anyone could imitate me so quickly? Unless the one we're arresting is Dumbledore or you-know-who." "Humph. Why did you go off on your own?" Moody snorted. He hadn't found anything suspicious. The Dolores in front of him looked genuine. That didn't stop his ire at the independent action. "I didn't want to miss an opportunity. I saw a python," he continued, "and it ran off when it saw me. I was worried it might be Riddle's spy." Dolores waved a hand and a python as thick as a thigh bobbed into view. Moody inspected it and found nothing unusual. "Clearly you were mistaken," he snapped, sharp with displeasure. Then he stalked off to investigate the other side of the grounds, refusing even a glance at Dolores. "Don't mind him. He's like that," Tonks said, sidling up to Dolores and punching his elbow lightly. "What should we do with the snake?" "Useless. Let it go." Dolores released the levitation charm. The python dropped to the ground and immediately coiled, body rigid with fear. "Keep looking for more clues," Dolores said, patting Tonks on the shoulder. She nodded, distracted, and her eyes wandered to the courtyard's sculptures and fountains. "The wings on that statue are beautifully done." Dolores pinched his left wrist with his right hand while watching the others busy themselves, a faint smile tugging at his lips. At that moment, the man everyone called Dolores was not Dolores at all. Cyrus, having lured the real Dolores into the forest, had transfigured himself into Dolores's likeness. The real Dolores had been transformed into the snake the group had just found. And Nagini, well, Nagini was now wrapped around the wrist of Cyrus's Dolores as a silver, snake-shaped bracelet. Since mastering the transfiguration of Imago Magus, Cyrus's understanding of transfiguration had deepened dramatically. Coupled with a wand built around a Thunderbird feather core, his transfiguration had gained a remarkable boost. That confidence let him pass Moody's scrutiny, at least enough to fool the less suspicious eyes. Even if Moody had detected something, Cyrus could still handle the Auror and the others. Moody's injured leg limited him. But Cyrus wanted to avoid drawing attention. His real aim was the Ministry of Magic. After obtaining the Resurrection Stone, he had reconnected with Malfoy to ask about Vault 12 and the owners of the oldest Gringotts vaults. He'd only a sketchy knowledge of the events in the game Legacy. He'd bought it, found the storyline flat, and stopped playing. Yet scattered videos and a few historical overlaps convinced him of one thing. Ancient magic was real, and Lily Potter was proof. Whether Vault 12 contained secrets of ancient magic, he intended to discover himself. Directly breaking into the Ministry was out of the question. He might not fear Aurors, but Dumbledore was not to be trifled with. Cyrus planned to obtain an identity and blend in. Otherwise, any trace left at Gaunt Manor would be discovered and traced back. He'd even gone back to Azkaban to question Death Eater Luke Wood, but Wood knew nothing about a key to Vault 12 or ancient magic. For now, he had only his and Malfoy's conjectures. The key was probably somewhere within the Ministry. By sunset, the search had turned up nothing definitive. No one left. An old man in a gray robe appeared on the hillside, beard dragging to his belt. Dumbledore. Confronting Dumbledore again still put pressure on Cyrus. Albus. Moody limped over to greet him. Everything all right at school? And, if I may, watch out for Sirius. He's more dangerous than the ordinary Death Eater. On the contrary, I think Tom Riddle is more dangerous, Dumbledore said, stretching his neck as he surveyed the altered manor. Riddle's aesthetic has improved considerably. It's good to see he no longer prefers everything dark. I don't know anywhere darker than Hogwarts Castle, Cyrus shot back, unwilling to be outdone. If you catch Tom Riddle, you could have him redesign the castle before sending him to Azkaban. A fine suggestion, Dolores, Dumbledore said, pretending to consider it. Then more seriously, Alastair, have you found anything? About 4 miles away, an abandoned Gaunt house left very strong magical traces, Moody replied. Riddle was there and did something, but his current whereabouts are unknown. I'm very curious what he did, Dumbledore said. Have there been any tragedies nearby? No, Moody said. Why do you ask? Nothing, only a general concern about an escaped criminal. Dumbledore's tone was casual, but Moody knew him well enough to accept some of it at face value. If he left nothing, he must have taken something. We came too late. Anything else? Moody asked. Dolores found a snake, Tonks answered promptly. That snake's nothing special, Moody dismissed. Dumbledore, however, wouldn't let the possibility go. He also spoke Parseltongue, which made this more important. He turned to Cyrus and said, Could you bring it here for me to see? If Dumbledore had arrived earlier, Cyrus would never have used a transformed person as cover. Powerful wizards could sometimes detect altered memories. Still, Cyrus felt the pressure lessen. He had a plan, and his disguise had held this long. Of course, Cyrus said. 104. Night trip to the Ministry of Magic. Huh, when did that snake disappear? Tonks moved faster than Cyrus, but she was the first to notice that the python, which had been too afraid to stir earlier, had somehow slipped away. She considered casting Oxio, but feared she might summon every serpent within range, so she let it go. An entire afternoon's passed. Do you really expect a snake to stay put? Cyrus said lightly. Dumbledore, who had been searching as well, looked blank when the snake couldn't be found. He had lingered at Riddle Manor far longer than one might expect of a man there to investigate. He examined its new furnishings with the scrutiny of a guest admiring beauty rather than an Auror searching for clues. After night fell, he had gone on to the old Gaunt house, where he stayed until late, studying the curse Cyrus had once deciphered. In truth, Cyrus couldn't tell whether anything had been learned. All right, Alastair, since Riddle has gone, I think we should head back, Dumbledore said, rising slowly to steady himself. Did you find anything? Moody asked. My only discovery is that things are probably worse than before. The worry on Dumbledore's face was real. Something had clearly been taken from the Gaunt property, something Dumbledore had been hunting for. Perhaps, Dumbledore thought, after someone had already removed a Horcrux, Riddle had decided the old hiding place wasn't safe and moved the object elsewhere. Missing this chance meant it would be even harder to find the Horcrux next time. Still, he did not seem defeated. He had spent decades without locating one. Missing one more was not the end of the world. Perhaps the failure would even clarify some doubts in his mind. All right, Alastair, he added more cheerfully, no matter what, I believe there's something more important waiting for us. What's that? Rest, of course. He smiled. It's late. Old people do not get much sleep, and if I miss the hour, I might forfeit tonight's sweet dreams." With a whimsical air he left, and Moody was left scowling. Tonks, by contrast, admired Dumbledore's flair and found him very stylish. Cyrus had no patience for a sentimental retreat. He didn't want to dally over a futile search. He wanted to get back to the Ministry and find the key to Vault 12. But the Ministry was technically closed at this hour. "Since the clues vanished again, we should probably call it," Cyrus said to Moody. "I'm not intending to trudge through the countryside all night looking for it." "You call yourself an auror?" Moody barked. "In my day, we hunted Death Eaters day and night. Do you know how many people gave their lives for that?" "But without a lead, staying here is just wasting time," Cyrus answered, "and I'm the one on duty tonight." He didn't wait for Moody's reply. He apparated away. He did not go home. Not to Dolores Umbridge's house, that is. Living as someone else had its limits. At first glance, he could mimic a person, but long-term habitation, sharing a life, rote domestic habits, was another thing entirely. He had learned details of Dolores's life from her memories, enough to impersonate her in short encounters, but sustaining that illusion day after day would reveal small, inevitable differences. Cyrus arrived at the Ministry's visitor entrance. There were easier ways in, the flue network to the atrium, the flushing toilets used by many wizards, but he didn't want to risk exposing Dolores at the Ministry at such a late hour, and he preferred to use his own face for once. Everyone was hunting Tom Riddle just now, and forcing his way into the Ministry under that shadow would only be a dramatic invitation to trouble. He could have tried to contact Death Eaters. He knew the summoning charms, but he had no desire to associate with those dirtied folk. The visitor entrance looked at best forlorn. A deserted street, likely under a muggle-repelling charm, flanked a few dilapidated offices where no one had worked for years, a tiny pub, and an overflowing skip. The most striking feature was a single red telephone booth, antique and battered, several panes of glass missing, the wall behind covered in graffiti. Cyrus thought of the grandeur of Makusa and felt, not for the first time, that Britain's magic community had an old, fading dignity about it. Dumbledore's presence was the last bright thing holding back the dark. Inside the booth, the phone hung crooked, its cord pulled halfway out as if someone had yanked it. Cyrus lifted the receiver and dialed, the rotary wheel clacking with a sound he'd only ever seen in old Muggle cartoons. "Let me think, 62442. When the dial snapped back, a woman's voice spoke, clear and detached, yet it didn't sound as though it came from the receiver, but from nowhere and everywhere around him. "Welcome to the Ministry of Magic. Please state your name and purpose." "Cyrus, I'm here to retrieve something," he said. "Thank you. Visitor, please take a badge and pin it to the front of your clothes." A metal badge slid out of the coin slot. Cyrus picked it up and read the printed words. "Cyrus, here to retrieve something." The Ministry requires all visitors to undergo inspection at the security desk and to register their wand. The security desk is at the far end of the atrium. The floor beneath his feet trembled. The street outside the booth rose and slid away. The dingy buildings and discarded rubbish disappeared. The world went dark above him, and with a scraping, rhythmic sound, the booth descended into the depths of the Ministry. A thin band of golden light traced his feet and widened to wrap around his body. The fireplaces in the walls were all unlit, and the ceiling, peacock blue in the dimness, was alive with shifting golden symbols as the lift slowed. "Because you are visiting the Ministry at an unscheduled hour, your movements will be monitored by aurors," the voice informed him. "The Ministry of Magic wishes you a pleasant evening." "Thank you," Cyrus replied. The booth door opened onto the atrium as if he were stepping out of a different world. Water from an enormous golden fountain sang continuously. Bright jets sprang from the tips of wands, from centaur arrowheads, from goblin hats, from the little ears of house elves, and fell into the shallow pool. The atrium was magnificent and refined, less extravagant than Makusa, more conservative and thoroughly English. The wand registration desk stood empty, though Cyrus knew that several aurors had been waiting in the atrium since his call. Within moments, 5 wands lifted and glowed toward him, their tips sharp with attention. "Good evening, aurors," Cyrus said. 105, Department of Mysteries, additional update for Mr. Mingyu. "Good evening, aurors." The Ministry of Magic's welcoming ceremony is certainly unique, isn't it? Cyrus said, his expression casual. Before he finished, 5 spells overlapped from different corners. Expelliarmus. 5 Expelliarmus bolts shot toward him. Behind Cyrus, the Ministry elevator doors had already closed. There was no way to retreat. He didn't need to. He did not bother to lift a wand or speak a word. Yet the air around him twisted, forming stray electric currents that rose like hot air and coalesced into a crackling, lightning shield that swallowed the Expelliarmus bolts. Wordless, wandless casting, no gestures required. Then the current surged, branching and snapping like an exploding tree or a swarm of snakes, lashing at the aurors, stinging their skin and locking their muscles with paralysis. A blinding white flash, and when the light faded, the 5 aurors were curled on the floor, limbs rigid as if frozen solid. The Ministry's atrium was unrecognizable. The beautiful golden fountain lay shattered, spraying water in wild arcs like a broken showerhead. The centaur statue's head had been ripped off, and fragments of broken arrows struck the goblin statue's hat. Cyrus walked past the downed aurors with his hands clasped behind his back. He had no intention of killing them. If he had wanted to, they would have been incinerated by the lightning, not merely immobilized. As he moved down the long black corridor, he casually flicked his arm, sealing the entrances to the fireplaces along the way so no one could apparate out and raise the alarm. Dumbledore was probably already back at Hogwarts, and with the Aurors at the Ministry incapacitated, it was unlikely anyone could warn him. Cyrus's lightning assault had been a spur-of-the-moment decision. Unless Dumbledore was a seer, he couldn't have anticipated it. At the security checkpoint, Cyrus stopped and registered himself properly. After all, he reminded the wards, he wasn't a terrorist like Lord Voldemort. He was a visitor who had come in through the main entrance. Then he tossed the visitor's paper and pen aside, clapped once, and stepped back into the elevator. His destination was the Department of Mysteries. In the wizarding world, many forms of magic defied explanation even by the greatest wizards. If ordinary magic was a miracle to muggles, then the magic sealed inside the Department of Mysteries was a miracle among miracles. Even if Cyrus failed to find the Vault 12 key, uncovering the department's secrets would be a prize far greater than the Philosopher's Stone. He knew it would be difficult, probably harder than mastering the stone, but worth the attempt. The elevator dropped to the lowest level. Cyrus stepped into an ancient, austere black corridor and followed it to a single, unadorned door that seemed to whisper invitations. He pushed it open and entered a vast circular chamber. Everything, ceiling and floor, was black, polished like obsidian, and the space could have been a fortress for a dark lord. 12 identical, unmarked doors were set evenly into the circular wall, like the hours on a clock. Under the glow of eerie blue flames on the walls, each door radiated a solemn, uncanny aura. Of the 12 doors, excluding the one he had come through, 11 still concealed mysteries. Cyrus already knew what lay behind 7 of them. 4 remained unknown. Accio key, he tried, but the charm had no effect. Looks like I'll have to check them one by one. After he stepped into the chamber, the door behind him closed on its own. The ring of doors in the wall began to rotate like a great turntable. When it stopped, he could no longer tell which way led back. He marked the first door and opened it. Inside was a tall, chilly room lined with towering shelves holding dusty crystal balls of every size. A few glowed with a faint, flowing light. Most were dead and dark, their recorded prophecies long since broken. The seer's office held little interest for Cyrus. He already knew the major prophecies concerning Lord Voldemort and Harry, and he'd learned from Voldemort's handling of prophecy that forcing a prophecy often only makes one entangled in it. Better not to poke at fate unnecessarily. He closed the door and left a mark so he'd know which rooms he'd already visited. The wall turned again. Cyrus opened the second door to a room that seemed out of place in the oppressive department. Light danced everywhere like sunshine on diamonds, refracting off a profusion of gems. The walls were covered with clocks, giant grandfather clocks, pocket watches, ornate timepieces of every size, filling the air with a rapid, relentless ticking, like thousands of tiny, orderly footsteps in a march. This was the time chamber. The ticking pressed on him, making his chest constrict, as if time itself were measuring his heartbeat. Instead of retreating, Cyrus went to the far end of the room and approached a bell-shaped crystal case that seemed to be the source of all the light. Inside, currents of shimmering air churned and eddied without rest. Time was abstract, but motion was eternal, like a hummingbird trapped in endless cycles of birth and death, beating its wings again and again. Woke up at 5 in the morning because that damned cat at home wouldn't stop meowing and couldn't get back to sleep. So I got up and wrote, hence why I'm so groggy at work now. Sob. Today I'm making up an extra chapter for Minue, and I'll try to make up Erdo's tomorrow. From now on, I'll update consistently at 11 p.m. It might be nicer to read the chapters in sequence. Chapter 1 and 6. Picking up that time turner. Extra for Big Boss Dadios. Cyrus picked up a time turner. The little instrument was engraved with the hour reversal charm. In theory, anyone who learned that charm could travel back in time without a time turner. In practice, it wasn't that simple. The sand in the hourglass was magical too. The flowing grains themselves felt like a piece of time made tangible. In the future battle in the Department of Mysteries, the glass in front of Cyrus was smashed and the time turner vanished from the world. Any power that touched time was inevitably dangerous and inscrutable, and Cyrus wanted, naturally, to master it. The time turner had severe limits, even to the point of being almost useless, but Cyrus couldn't let the chance pass. Sometimes a few hours could change everything. The third door he opened led to a place he had never understood. Of the 12 doors in the department, he recognized 7. The seer's office symbolized the future, the time chamber the past, the brain room and the planet room represented thought and the cosmos, the hall of death represented death itself, and the locked door Dumbledore had called love. The room Cyrus had just entered was full of brilliant, colorful atlases. "This is?" he murmured. He stepped in slowly. Models and specimens filled the room, odd plants, magical beasts, even representations of wizards, everything laid out like a catalog of history. From ancient times to the present, species had evolved and vanished here. If one traced magic back to its origin, there was nothing. The hall contained magic itself, an unanswered question. No one knew where magic came from. Cyrus saw old manuscripts, probably left by the Unspeakables who guarded this place. Unspeakables were the most secretive workers at the ministry, custodians of the department's mysteries, who also studied whatever enigmas the rooms produced. Over the years, many things had simply been accepted as unexplainable. Most Unspeakables now worked in the seer's office or kept watch over the strange brain in the brain room. The parchment in his hands was brittle and dry, ready to crumble. The ink had faded, but he could make out fragments. Magic, also known as ether. This is a force that alters reality. Yet the existence of magic itself is unreasonable. Nature abides by its own laws. Magic seems to come from outside those laws, breaking the old rules and forming new ones. Regarding research on, the rest of the page was illegible. He tried a reparo, but the spell did nothing. It would be foolish to waste time on ruined notes. If they had held anything vital, the ministry would have secured them. They wouldn't still be here to be found. He left the Hall of Magic and checked the other chambers. Several doors were tightly sealed. Forcing them open would draw attention, and he didn't even know what lay behind them. The key to Vault 12 wasn't in the Department of Mysteries, so where could it be? Cyrus walked out onto the dark corridor and idly turned the time turner in his fingers. The Vault 12 key concerned ancient magic, but after all, it was a Gringotts key. There was nothing to say it had to be in the department. That realization narrowed nothing. The ministry itself was enormous, riddled with undetectable extension charms. Finding a single key would be like finding a needle in a haystack. And he no longer had the luxury of searching slowly. He felt the magic he had used on the main hall's fireplace begin to break. Aurors were on their way. "You'd better leave," he decided. "Now I know why Mr. Cyrus wanted you to learn the Patronus charm. He must have seen this coming," Hermione said on the Hogwarts Express as she and Ron helped Harry sit up. Professor Lupin, still carrying the relief of having driven off the Dementors, offered Harry some chocolate from a pocket. "Someone knew all this would happen?" Lupin asked, surprised. Ron and Hermione exchanged a look and realized there had been a fourth occupant in their compartment. "It's a friend of ours," Ron stumbled. He thought that since the Ministry sent Dementors out to look for Sirius Black and Tom Riddle, Harry might be in danger. He figured Dementors aren't to be trusted, so he suggested Harry learn the Patronus charm ahead of time. It's the only spell that can drive them off. Sounds like a very sensible friend, Lupin said gently. Dumbledore didn't like them either. By the way, Harry, if you want to learn the Patronus properly, you can come to my office. I forgot to introduce myself, Remus Lupin. If all goes well, I'll be your Defense Against the Dark Arts professor this term. Thank you, Professor Lupin. Harry's voice was weak. He felt shame about fainting. Dementors magnified fear, but no one else had collapsed the way he had. The stalled train began moving again, and by nightfall they arrived at Hogwarts. Harry was taken to the hospital wing for examination. Hermione was summoned alone to Professor McGonagall's office. Miss Granger, I need to discuss your timetable for this term, McGonagall said, pursing her lips in that familiar, disapproving way. She took out a timetable and pushed it toward Hermione. Hermione scanned it. 9 a.m. Divination, Muggle Studies, Arithmancy, 3 classes at the same time. You were the only student last term who took every course, McGonagall said. Given your grades and consistency, the professors unanimously agreed you are capable of doing so again. How am I supposed to attend 3 classes at once? Hermione asked. Percy had hinted that McGonagall had a solution, but hadn't explained how. McGonagall allowed the smallest hint of a smile. Information about the time turner is restricted. It's only made available to a few outstanding students. After you handed in your course choices last year, I wrote to the Ministry many times to get permission. She produced a small golden hourglass. You twist this, and you can go back in time, up to 5 hours. She set the hourglass on the desk and fixed Hermione with a stern look. The time turner is a dangerous thing. Headmaster Dumbledore used one once to catch Tom Riddle. You must understand how serious this is. Dumbledore used it to catch Tom Riddle? Hermione stared at the tiny device. McGonagall nodded. Now listen to the rules. First, you must never use it for anything other than academic purposes. Hermione took the time turner into her hand. 107. Auror, or Death Eater. The next morning, when Cyrus, disguised as Dolores, went to work at the Ministry, reporters from the Daily Prophet had already swarmed the entrance, making it nearly impossible to get through. Quick quotes, quills flashed and scratched as journalists tackled every employee they could catch, demanding to know what they thought about the attack on the Ministry the night before, and whether Minister for Magic Cornelius Fudge had been derelict in his duties. Cyrus picked out one particularly conspicuous figure among the press. She was flamboyant, hair arranged in stiff, enormous curls that made her face look even more pronounced. Gems glittered on her clothes. Her spectacles were rimmed in gold with a thin chain. Her lips were painted a deeper red than roses, and her nails were the kind of luridly long talons that suggested someone with terrible taste had been allowed to choose other people's veins. Rita Skeeter. He steeled himself to skirt around her and slip inside, but Rita's insect-like, compound eyes locked on him immediately. "John! Dolores!" she shrieked in a shrill, triumphant voice and barreled toward him, teeth flashing as though she found herself irresistible. She pushed through the crowd with sharp nails, and the air around her turned thick with a sweet, cloying perfume. They had been at school together years ago, but they had never really spoken. Rita was the sort who preferred the limelight through manipulation rather than the self-aggrandizing showmanship of someone like Gilderoy Lockhart. Cyrus leaned back a step, repulsed but careful not to be rude. "You are?" "Heartless," Rita purred, thrusting a plump finger forward, as if that name were some coquettish familiarity. She'd obviously done her homework. Getting scoops from the Ministry was never easy, and a former classmate, now working as an Auror, was too good an opportunity to miss. "Come on, Dolores, let's step aside and catch up. By the way, what do you think happened last night?" Her presence made Cyrus queasy. "Please move aside, Miss Skeeter. I have to get to work. Otherwise, I might arrange for you to spend a few days in Azkaban," he said politely, and tried to pass. Rita merely smiled, and the quick quotes quill at her elbow began to scrawl furiously. "Regarding last night's attack on the Ministry," it wrote in a frantic, slanted hand, "active Auror John Dolores refused to comment." From his expression, it was obvious he is deeply dissatisfied with Minister for Magic Cornelius Fudge's poor handling of the situation. Dolores believes that had he been on guard, Tom Riddle would never have been allowed to swagger in and out of the ministry. Given Dolores's distinguished school record, I, Rita Skeeter, heartily agree. Dolores thinks it was ridiculous that the ministry sent so many Aurors to hunt two fugitives. When asked about the Dementors, he sneered, "They may be unpleasant, but at least more reliable than some Aurors." Cyrus froze. He did not much care if Rita smeared the ministry or used the name Dolores. After all, he wasn't Dolores. But he would have to use that identity for a long time to come while he searched for the Vault 12 key. If Rita's story ran, Dolores would become notorious across the ministry, and that would complicate everything. He tried to sound reasonable. "Miss Skeeter, you'd do well to delete some of those inaccuracies." "Oh, really?" Rita said sweetly, but the quill did not stop. Dolores indignantly demanded I delete these inaccurate statements. It wrote, "A clear sign that, under pressure from the minister, all employee statements are being controlled." Before Cyrus could respond, someone grabbed his arm and pulled him back. "Wait, Dolores, don't be hasty." Nymphadora Tonks had appeared out of nowhere, eyes wide, assuming he was about to lash out. Cyrus meant only to reprimand Rita, but Tonks misread his intent. "She's provoking you," Tonks snapped. "Besides, what would happen if an active Auror actually laid hands on an innocent law-abiding citizen right in front of the ministry?" Rita's smile turned poisonous. "Oh dear, a young girl, an indiscretion?" she purred, throwing the insinuation out like bait. Nymphadora Tonks, matching her name, certainly seems indulgent. Tonks bristled. The woman who just told Cyrus to calm down leapt at Rita with claws metaphorically bared. "What did you say?" Rita licked her lips and played the wounded journalist. The quill kept writing, oblivious to the growing tension. Cyrus's patience snapped. With a sharp motion and a word that was barely audible, he made the quick quotes quill explode. The quill and the parchment it had been filling burst into powder and dust. Rita staggered back, startled and then furious. Her high-heeled shoe, already strained by the stumble, split at the ankle as she tried to regain her balance. For a moment, she looked helpless and indignant all at once. The commotion drew the attention of everyone at the ministry entrance. Even Tonks, who had been ready to leap, faltered. "Dolores, how could you?" Rita recovered herself with the practiced speed of someone who'd spent a career manufacturing outrage. She folded herself into a picture of wounded dignity and, projecting to the gathered crowd, launched into a speech designed to make herself the martyr. "Ladies and gentlemen, a respected Auror of the ministry has laid hands on a law-abiding wizard in broad daylight. Is this how our Aurors protect us? Is this the government we chose? Do you think threats and intimidation will make me retreat? Impossible. As a respected journalist, my duty to the public will not be silenced." She threw the words like a net, and it worked. The other reporters and the crowd immediately began to see Cyrus and Tonks as the aggressors. Rita's voice rose, full of dramatic finality. "I can't help but ask, who stands before us today, an Auror or a Death Eater? 108, Animagus exposed. I can't help but wonder, is the person standing in front of me an Auror or a brutal Death Eater?" Rita Skeeter trilled, making the kind of outrageous accusation that froze the air. People rarely the Dark Lord's name anymore, and the label Death Eater was even more hushed, a living wound for families who had lost loved ones. To call someone that was to cast them into a darkness from which there was no easy return. If Rita's charge stuck, the accused would be looking at Azkaban. Cyrus found the whole thing absurd, laughable even, but the accusation carried a sting of possibility that made his lips curl. If he were to be linked to Death Eaters, he'd be the one in charge of them, and he had no taste for leading a band of gutter scavengers. Rita's words detonated like a bomb. A crowd swelled, pushing in until they surrounded the three of them. The glare of 100 faces, the flash of magical cameras, Tonks's grip on Cyrus's shoulder tightened until her knuckles went white. "Dolores, what do we do?" she whispered, voice brittle as a plucked string. Tonks couldn't believe the accusation either, but if things went sideways, careers could be ruined. Cyrus could be suspended, and she, an apprentice Auror, could be dismissed without ceremony. The faces in the crowd melted into silhouette. The press of bodies felt like a tide. Tonks staved off a fainting spell with all the force of will she had left. A heavy hand settled on her other shoulder, solid and steady as a boulder, and the world snapped back into focus. Mad-Eye Moody forced his way through the throng, silver hair askew, and Fudge followed closely behind, sweating and shepherding a plump woman in pink away from the reporters. Tonks could make out Moody's face, shifting in and out through the people, but when she glanced at Dolores Umbridge, his figure seemed oddly blurred, an uneasy detail she didn't have time to sort out. "Stand back," Cyrus said. He kept his back to the crowd and walked forward a few steps, watching Rita as one might watch a particularly loud insect. Rita bristled. She wanted an audience, and she wanted Cyrus to be stumped and ashamed. "What do you want?" she snapped. Before he could answer, Cornelius Fudge and Mad-Eye Moody had shoved through from opposite sides. Fudge planted himself between Cyrus and Rita as if physical proximity could blunt the blast of accusation. Umbridge fixed Cyrus and Tonks with a look that scolded them by proxy for making a fuss in front of the ministry. "My dear minister," Rita cooed for all she was worth, bright lipstick making her expression harsh. "An auror from the ministry attacked me, a law-abiding citizen. I think I'm owed an explanation." She fixed her gaze on Fudge with a practiced helplessness. Fudge's face tightened. He wasn't frightened of Rita personally so much as what the public fallout might do to him. "Dolores, what on earth is going on?" he demanded, turning to Cyrus. His voice came out in jerky bursts, as if he had to force each word past a swelling throat. "Who gave you the right to attack a law-abiding citizen?" His features twitched with the strain. "Minister, I'm only doing my duty," Cyrus said, speaking slowly. Tonks opened her mouth as if to speak, but he stopped her with a look. Fudge blinked, puzzled. Cyrus's gaze swept the gathered wizards and witches, compelling them to listen. He settled his eyes on Rita, and with that look, Rita's practiced assurance began to fray. "Rita Skeeter," Cyrus said, "do you deny that you're breaking the law right now?" Rita bristled and straightened. "Of course," she began, too quickly, chest thrust out, the actress readying her performance. She could not admit to wrongdoing in front of so many. Moody muttered beside them, concern rough in his voice. "What are you playing at, boy? Don't make this worse." "Rita's sources are a little unusual," Arthur Weasley observed quietly to a colleague, not far enough to be private but too low to draw immediate attention. The remark caught a few curious looks. Cyrus began to circle Rita, each step chipping away at her confidence. Years of unregistered infractions couldn't all be hidden forever, he implied. Rita's heart thumped against her sternum. She wondered if Cyrus had evidence or was bluffing. "Do you imagine you can hide being an unregistered animagus forever?" Cyrus asked, blunt as a wand knuckle. Fudge, who had been straining for the managerial instinct to seize control of the narrative, looked as if someone had slammed a door on him. "What?" he said, as though he hadn't caught the first words. "You heard me." Cyrus kept his voice level. "Rita Skeeter has been an unregistered animagus for years. Insect form, a beetle. Many of her scoops were obtained by creeping into people's private conversations in that form. The foundation that painted Rita's face could not hide the whitening blood from her cheeks. For a heartbeat, she was silent. Then her practiced mask fluttered and fell. The crowd stirred, a ripple of shock and indignation. An unregistered animagus was not merely scandalous, it was illegal, and it explained the uncanny accuracy of her reporting. Moody's one good eye glittered with something between vindication and warning. Fudge's mouth made a thin line. Umbridge's smile tightened into something like triumph, until she realized the implications for someone of Rita's particular notoriety. Rita's bravado crumpled, her voice shrank. Around them, people began to murmur, reassess, and point. What had been a single accusation against an auror turned into a far more dangerous exposure, one that could put Rita Skeeter, not Cyrus, on the defensive beam of the ministry's law. As the crowd pressed in, cameras clicking like a chorus of small, hungry beasts, the scene ended not with a blow, but with a cold, efficient unmasking. The reporter, who had made a career of exposing other people's secrets, found one of her own, dragged into the light. 109. Pig's Head Bar. The Pig's Head Bar was a dilapidated tavern tucked away in a quiet corner of Hogsmeade. Everything about it suggested neglect. The wooden sign at the entrance dangled broken, the stand was split, the door hung crooked, and the tables, chairs, and cutlery inside were in ruin. For Aberforth, the barkeeper, brokenness seemed to be a way of life. Worse than the decay was the filth. A bloody pig's head, long since mounted above the door, reeked of mutton. Thick dust caked the windows, so sunlight barely passed through. The floor looked like packed earth, but was really centuries of grime laid over stone. The tavern sat off Hogsmeade's main street at the junction of a small lane, hardly a place that would flourish in the Muggle world. Yet in the British wizarding world, the Pig's Head's reputation came second only to the Three Broomsticks, because it was the one pub that never turned away dark wizards. As long as you drank, paid, and caused no trouble, Aberforth didn't pry. What deals took place, what creatures were smuggled, what dark plans were hatched, nobody cared. What began as a place for weary dark wizards to drink had become a favored gathering point. Tonks's hair was flaxen today. Cyrus had never seen it look so subdued. "Isn't it because of the commotion you caused at the ministry entrance? It meant I got reassigned away from the job with you," she murmured, annoyed. Cyrus had publicly unmasked Rita Skeeter as an illegal animagus at the ministry's entrance, a messy spectacle that solved a public relations crisis but embarrassed Umbridge. In private, she'd retaliated, pulling Cyrus and Tonks off the hunt for Sirius Black and Tom Riddle and giving them a most disagreeable surveillance task. Cyrus, however, was oddly pleased with the reassignment. Their targets were goblins. Tonks settled into one of the greasy chairs and, visibly nervous, ordered a butterbeer. She'd altered her facial features and swallowed herself into her robes so she looked every inch a dark wizard. "What are you having?" she asked. Cyrus sat with thinly veiled distaste. He suspected the table had never been cleaned. The surface was sticky as if drenched in old cola. He wasn't there to enjoy the decor. "Fire whiskey," he said casually. Though the place revolted him, he played the part, another untroubled dark wizard among many. Tonks's furtive glances around the room drew attention. Dark wizards noticed anything out of the ordinary here. Cyrus tapped the table to draw her gaze back. "First time at the Pig's Head? Rule of thumb, don't pry into other people's business. Mind your own." She opened her mouth to explain that their whole assignment was to observe dark wizards for suspicious activity, but she stopped. Cyrus had spoken loud enough for others to hear. Her earlier behavior had already invited suspicion. Some had taken her for an Auror in disguise. A voice, hoarse and deliberately roughened, protested from beneath Tonks's black robes in a way that sounded almost youthful, like a lamb trying to pass for a wolf. That only intensified the room's interest. What had been wariness turned to greed. An inexperienced dark wizard in that crowd was the scent of fresh meat to a pack that had been hungry a long time. Some already schemed to waylay Tonks after they left. Cyrus, however, didn't look like prey. They weren't willing to take the risk on him. He wasn't worried. If he wanted, a single well-placed spell could clear the Pig's Head of everyone inside. He sat with his eyes on Tonks, but he had already put up a clumency and was monitoring every movement in the bar. To him it felt like a small-scale God's eye, an awareness that let him perceive activity around him without needing to look. Most wizards' occlumency didn't produce images like that. It was more like a thermal map than a clear view. Cyrus's ancient magic, however, made a difference. Ancient magic was elusive, contained like lightning in a dragon's hide or a thunderbird's charge. Cyrus had mastered two aspects of it: control of lightning and vision enhancement. The latter amplified not only his physical sight, but granted a magical perception that could reconstruct colors and fine detail when combined with certain spells. With it, the Pig's Head's dim corners were as readable as an open room. Aberforth, impatient, picked up 2 cups that looked as though they had never been washed and poured drinks. 7 dark wizards kept their eyes fixed on Tonks. A few lost interest once they decided she wasn't worth the trouble. In a shadowy corner, a bent old wizard with a wild beard had been propped up with a copy of the Quibbler and was laughing so much his single remaining tooth flashed. Cyrus didn't expect to find a Quibbler reader here. He glanced at the paper and caught Lovegood's headline, "Fudge's Rotten Tooth Plan." The article claimed that the 5 defeated Aurors were proof. Apparently, because of toothaches, they'd been routed by Tom Riddle alone. The Quibbler was probably the most outlandish periodical Cyrus had ever seen. At first, he thought its absurdity might spark some inspiration. After all, genius and madness sometimes run close together. In the end, though, it yielded nothing but a few laughs. He read it through several times and found nothing more substantial. Most of its readership seemed to be patients from St. Havrat, Mungos, wizards with the kind of spell-related mental problems that ordinary folk would call insanity. Given that many dark wizards carried their own brand of instability, it wasn't entirely surprising to see an old wizard reading the Quibbler in public. Cyrus ignored the irrelevant figures in the room and focused on someone wrapped head to toe in heavy robes. The person was very short, so short their feet didn't reach the floor when they sat, and broad-shouldered. Gloved hands were unusually wide. It could only be a goblin. The sight of goblins in the Pig's Head bar always called to mind the Goblin Rebellion centuries ago. Back then, goblins had used the bar as a base and nearly rose up. For decades, they had pressed for more rights. From a goblin's point of view, it made sense. From the viewpoint of wizards or muggles, however, no one wanted to hand over the right to forge or possess deadly weapons to another race. Add to that the goblins' bottomless greed, and you had a recipe for constant friction. Bang! The long, thin bartender slammed 2 bottles down in front of Cyrus and Tonks. He looked rumpled, his silver hair unkempt and his white beard disordered. 2 sickles for butterbeer, 4 for fire whiskey, he grunted. Cyrus paid a galleon without fuss and made a discreet gesture toward the robed figure. Aberforth caught the signal. Paying for information was common here, though most of it stayed on the surface. No sensible dark wizard would broadcast their crimes. Aberforth said nothing. He slipped the coin into his pocket, tapped the greasy table once, and a shallow pool of water sprang up. The liquid flowed and shaped itself into letters. Goblin has been here several days. Waiting for someone. No one has appeared. Aberforth looked tired as he left, less of a comment about anyone in particular than a deep world weariness. Cyrus had his mark. He couldn't tell whether the goblins were planning another occupation of the Pig's Head as a command center or if they were coordinating with certain wizards. He wasn't overly worried. Goblins had always been quarrelsome, but in recent years they hadn't posed a real threat. Even after Voldemort's return, he had not bothered to recruit goblins. The Death Eaters had tried to court giants, to sway dementors and werewolves, even to bring acromantulas, creatures barely considered human, into their ranks. Voldemort, however, looked down on goblins. Despite their unmatched skill in crafting goblin-made artifacts and their insatiable greed, their native magic lagged far behind that of wizards. As a fighting force, they simply weren't comparable. At worst, another goblin disturbance would cause headaches for the Ministry. It wouldn't topple the Wizarding Order. Tonks, finishing her butterbeer, looked at Cyrus in surprise. "How did you know that person was a goblin?" she asked. "It's obvious," he said. "Only goblins are that short. And look at the hands. Even through the gloves, the proportions are wrong, too wide." Tonks glanced covertly at the robed figure while pretending to sip. The description matched perfectly. She felt a flicker of admiration. "He's a well-trained Auror," she thought. "Impressive." She wiped butterbeer foam from her lip and whispered, "Okay, how do we get information?" "Wait until he's alone and knock him out. It's only a goblin. I could handle it." "You've been training with Moody for 2 years," Cyrus said, exasperated. "Why be reckless? Catching one goblin won't tell us anything. It'll just tip them off." "So what then? For now, watch him and see who he's waiting for," Cyrus replied. "You're an imago magus. When the person he's expecting shows up, you can take that person's form and gather information." Tonks pouted, but conceded. "Fine. But I still wanted to be in on the mission to catch Sirius Black." "Don't be ridiculous," Cyrus said. "Your gift as an imago magus is rare, perfect for reconnaissance and infiltration. Charging headlong into Death Eaters is foolish." He thought of Tonks and Lupin's deaths in the original timeline and felt it would be a shame to waste her talents. With her power, she could impersonate a Death Eater and walk straight into danger and come out unscathed. That capability should be used strategically, not squandered on clumsy heroics. Since he himself had become the world's only imago magus, his transfiguration had grown strong enough to rival one as well. "Got it," Tonks said, sulking. She signaled for another butterbeer. A quick note about butterbeer. Many assumed it was non-alcoholic. It did contain a trace of alcohol, enough to give house elves a tipsy wobble, but mild enough that underage wizards could drink it without issue. Cyrus was surprised Tonks could stomach drinks made under such questionable hygienic standards. He certainly didn't intend to touch the fire whiskey sitting on the bar. "I say you," Cyrus began, meaning to point out the froth at the corner of her mouth when the pig's head door burst open. Harsh sunlight flooded the room. Everyone's attention jerked to the entrance and found a massive figure filling the doorway. Tonks dropped her voice, incredulous. Hey, it's Hagrid." "I know." Hagrid came in the way he always did, big, slow, and impossible to ignore. For a moment, his arrival caused the usual ripple of heads turning, then everyone went back to their drinks. He looked glum, his great frame squeezing clumsily between tables and nearly colliding with half the bar. There were no free seats he could see. Most witches and wizards gave him a wide berth, unless they were the sort who trafficked in creatures and wanted to make a profit. At last, he wedged himself down beside Cyrus and Tonks and flopped into the chair with enough force to wobble the table. "Excuse me." He produced a tiny handkerchief and blew his nose so loud it felt as if a megaphone had gone off beside Cyrus's ear. "Can I sit here? There's nowhere else." Tonks looked perfectly happy for him to stay, but Cyrus spoke first. He nudged the untouched glass of fire whiskey toward Hagrid and murmured, "It's on me." Thank you, you're a good person." Hagrid's eyes went wet as if someone had offered him charity for the first time. He seized the glass, drained it in one, and belched like a cannon. He wanted to drink and unload his grievances, but Cyrus cut him off. "Hagrid, I know you're upset, but we have things to discuss. Why don't you sit over there?" He pointed deliberately at the only other empty seat, opposite the goblin. "I'll buy you another sometime." The goblin's muffled face tightened. Cyrus could imagine the shock and fury behind the wrappings. He wanted to refuse, but no sound came. He stared at Cyrus with pure hatred, as if he'd like to tear him limb from limb. "Why did you get Hagrid to move?" Tonks asked quietly. "We're on a job," Cyrus said without changing expression. "Besides, everyone knows Hagrid's a talker." It had been deliberate. An open, straightforward man like Hagrid might get something out of the goblin, or at least there was no harm in trying. The goblin failed to stop Hagrid from sitting opposite him. Cyrus heard Hagrid call for 2 more fire whiskeys and watched as Hagrid drank and started to pour out his woes to the wrapped figure. He'd been made Professor of Care of Magical Creatures that year, Hagrid said, but his first class had gone badly and a Malfoy child had been injured. Hagrid wasn't bright, but he knew better than to cross the parents of a school board member. "It was just a scratch. He was pretending," Hagrid insisted, warmed by drink until his face flushed. "He's no Harry. Last year Harry broke his hand. Didn't make a fuss." In Hagrid's eyes, Harry was the perfect child, and Malfoy couldn't even dream of measuring up. After Harry came Hermione, Ginny, and Ron, in that exact order. His pride and anger carried him on. He talked of other things until he drifted to his father. Something about the goblin's size had reminded him of him. When the topic of his own past came up, Hagrid clammed up, more guarded than anyone would expect, and the conversation died. The goblin said nothing, only drank. By evening, most of the bar had emptied. Hagrid left, swaying and drunk. The goblin remained, as if deciding Pig's Head Bar might as well be his home. Cyrus requested a room. He and Tonks walked back toward the inn in silence until Tonks abruptly stopped, eyes wide. "Why did you only ask for 1 room? For 1 person, why would I need 2? Cyrus asked, mildly. "You, 1 person. What about me?" Tonks's tone was scandalized. "Are you going to make me sleep in the street?" "Can't you go home?" Cyrus said, as if that were obvious. "Unless you prefer the decor here. If that's the case, you should probably go to St. Mungo's and have your head examined." "What Auror goes home in the middle of a mission?" Tonks shot back. "Besides, you can go home if you have a home to go to." "Then get your own room," Cyrus said. "The ministry pays for this sort of thing. It wasn't worth arguing over." Tonks snorted and went to the front desk. A few minutes later, she returned, shoulders slumped. "There aren't any." There weren't many lodgers, but the rooms had all been taken. Cyrus was about to close the door when Tonks, with a quick, familiar movement, slipped under his arm and into the single room. He stood there for a second, muttered an incantation, and ran a few cleaning charms over the bed and the sink, then turned to make himself comfortable, with Tonks already dossed down beside him, head drooping, as if she'd always intended to be there. Geminio. Cyrus widened the room and conjured another bed. Tonks immediately flopped onto it, and her hair shifted to pale blue. "I'm exhausted," she sighed. "Exhausted? You sat in the pub all afternoon and cost me 12 sickles." Cyrus crossed to the door and pulled it open. Tonks rolled over. "Where are you going? For a walk outside?" "I'm coming too." "No, stay here and keep an eye on that goblin." He shut the door before she could protest. Tonks, annoyed, picked up a pillow and hurled it at the wood. Hogsmeade looked thin and tired in the evening. The sky was dimming. The sinking sun stained the distant clouds orange. Aurors paced the streets and Dementors lurked, drifting and watching for any chance to swoop. Cyrus had no particular mission. He simply wanted to feel the wizarding world's atmosphere again. Since his transmigration, he hadn't explored Hogsmeade properly and had been curious about the magical snacks. But many shops had closed early. Business was slow with Dementors on patrol. He failed to buy anything and instead attracted the attention of another stray. A gangly, scrawny black dog bounded over, wagged its tail, and yelped as it bit the leg of his trousers. "Sirius?" Cyrus recognized the dog at once. He glanced up, saw Dementors drifting by, then bent close and whispered, "Follow me." The dog let go and padded after him as he headed for the Three Broomsticks. The pub was nearly empty. Only Madame Rosmerta was behind the bar, polishing glasses. She blinked at the sight of Cyrus and the large black dog. "I thought it was another Dementor," she muttered. "They patrol twice a day. Customers are fewer than ever." She put the glass down. "What'll it be?" "A room for me, 2 butterbeers, and 2 orders of ribs sent up," Cyrus said quietly. He wanted somewhere private to talk. "All the rooms are empty, but you'll be risking Dementor harassment if you stay," Madame Rosmerta warned, then went into the kitchen. Cyrus led the dog upstairs. Once the door was closed, the animal straightened and transformed into a bedraggled gentleman. "Sirius," Cyrus said. "How did you recognize me?" Cyrus shrugged off his own disguise and returned to his usual appearance. "The look changed, but the scent didn't," Sirius said with a grin that showed yellowed teeth. "I thought you were done for until I saw your wanted poster. I didn't expect you to infiltrate the ministry. You here to guard me now?" Both had escaped Azkaban, but they were different in other ways. Cyrus smiled. "Scent, huh? Good to know I missed something." "You're not exactly living in luxury," Cyrus added. "Miserable. Anywhere's better than Azkaban." Sirius laughed, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Only thing is the rat's hiding too well. I thought as soon as he heard I was out, he'd bolt. I can't risk going into school openly." He'd been free for nearly 2 months, but hadn't found Peter Pettigrew. He had, however, been scrounging around for allies. The Shrieking Shack remained the only safe route to the school. Other secret passages led straight to the castle and were too dangerous. If they still had the Marauders map, it would be easier, but Filch had confiscated it years ago. "You didn't go to look for Harry?" Cyrus asked. He wasn't focused on Pettigrew. Pathetic as he was, punishment would catch up to him sooner or later. I've seen him from a distance." Sirius's voice slowed. He looked suddenly small. "He looks like James." "Then why not reveal yourself?" Cyrus pressed. "Give him a home, Sirius. Just like the Potters gave you a home when you left the House of Black. Harry needs that." Sirius flinched. Guilt made him hesitant. "What right have I got? If it weren't for me." "Now's your chance to make amends," Cyrus interrupted. "Have you seen Privet Drive? He's not doing well with the Dursleys. James left a poor impression." He met Sirius's eyes. "Do you really think he'll blame you? Harry's a good kid. He'll work out who betrayed his parents and who loves him. He'll be grateful to have a real relative who cares." Sirius fell silent, the conflict writ plain on his face. There was a soft knock. Cyrus shifted into Dolores Umbridge's appearance for a moment, cracked the door, and whispered, "Ribs and butterbeer." "Thank you, madam." He shut the door again, set the plates on the table, and opened a butterbeer. The drink was sweet and slightly sticky, pleasant enough. "Eat first. You've probably been living off scraps, haven't you?" "Not all the time rummaging through bins," Sirius muttered, then sat and ate. The earlier subject had pressed on him. He hated Death Eaters and Voldemort, but facing James Potter's son left him frightened, though perhaps it was only cowardice. He drank deeply, swallowed a piece of rib, then looked up, suddenly earnest. "By the way," he said, "what's this about the heir of Slytherin? 113. Darkness looms over Albanian jungles. What's this about the heir of the Chamber of Secrets?" Sirius demanded. "You know, it's hard not to know. Since your escape, every Auror I've met who's been hunting for us has been talking about it. You're the heir of Slytherin. Supposedly you controlled a giant basilisk, laid waste to Hogwarts, attacked several Muggle-born students," Cyrus said. Because he got along with Cyrus, Sirius sometimes forgot Cyrus had been a prisoner in Azkaban. Bound by the unbreakable vow while it lasted, he hadn't been able to press Cyrus about his past. Now that the contract was over, he could ask openly. "I don't believe you're that kind of person. Could you have been wronged, like I was?" "No. I'm the one behind the Chamber of Secrets incident," Cyrus replied flatly. "But only this time. The attack 50 years ago had nothing to do with me." He shrugged. "What, regretting that you helped me escape Azkaban?" The Chamber of Secrets case was tangled, especially for the Ministry. It amounted to the return of the Riddle who had vanished 50 years prior. The Ministry tried Cyrus, but kept the full truth about the earlier attack from the public. So most wizards only knew fragments, that Tom Riddle had released a basilisk, and that the episode had become a small, overlooked part of Dumbledore's many triumphs. "You command a basilisk, one stronger than any known creature, and didn't kill a soul?" Sirius scoffed. "Do you even have to worry about someone like you? I only need to kill Pettigrew. The rest isn't my concern." "All right, you can stay the night. I'm leaving," Cyrus said, rising. "Leaving? You're not staying? Stay here? With you, a hulking man?" Cyrus gave him a look that said he was joking. Did Sirius think Cyrus would pass up Tonks at the Hog's Head to camp out with him? Not a chance. Just as he reached the door, the air dropped several degrees and hurried footsteps sounded outside. Both men tensed. Sirius even let the ribs he'd been gnawing fall to the floor and shrank down again, changing into the large black dog. "Knock, knock, knock!" A hard rap at the door. "Open up! Aurors and Dementors," Madame Rosmerta's irritated voice called. Cyrus saw Sirius had already shifted. He pulled the door open, and a faceless black shape lunged in without hesitation. Cold slashed against Cyrus's skin like a razor. "Expecto Patronum!" Dolores cried. Silvery, cocoon-like threads of light burst from the tip of her wand, driving the Dementor back until it slammed into the opposite wall. "Get out, you filthy thing!" The silver light seared like flame. The Dementor recoiled as if burned and fled shrieking. Rosmerta and the accompanying Auror were stunned. The Auror even reflexively drew his wand, ready to duel Cyrus. "It's me," Cyrus said, stepping forward. "Dolores, what are you doing here?" The Auror hadn't expected to see Dolores. Both being Aurors made a search unnecessary. "I didn't know you could cast the Patronus charm. The Hog's Head has no spare rooms. I can't just squeeze in with Tonks, can I?" Cyrus watched the fleeing Dementor with disgust. "I don't know when all this nonsense will end. Tell me about it. I patrol with those things every day. Ruins all my fun," the Auror sighed. "Fudge has gone too far. These Dementors are going to cause trouble sooner or later. I heard he even sent Dementors to Hogwarts. He's gone mad." Rosmerta, not a Ministry employee, didn't restrain her curses for Fudge. The Auror's expression softened into something awkward. "What can he do, though? He's in charge now." Cyrus smiled coldly. Everyone knew Fudge was inept, but with Dumbledore gone for months, he'd tasted power and refused to let it go. "Don't say that in the Ministry if you want to be promoted," the Auror warned, then added, "At least Dementors are better than Sirius. He's a madman. More than 10 years ago, one spell killed so many people." "Speaking of Sirius," Rosmerta mused, "I never would have guessed he'd become a Death Eater. Of all the people who defected to the Dark Lord's side, he's the last I'd expect. I remember him at Hogwarts. If someone had told me then he'd turn like this, I'd have thought they were drunk." "Tell me about it. What a madman. Killing so many people," the Auror agreed. "He must have snapped after the Dark Lord fell. And Pettigrew, he killed him. They were so close at school." Inside, Sirius pricked his ears up at the mention of names. He barked furiously in response. "What? You have a dog?" the Auror asked, curious. "A stray. Looked pitiful, so I let it in and gave it some food. Cyrus said, opening the door wide enough to show the thin, bony black dog. Sirius glared at the Auror like a coiled storm. "Don't mess with it," the Auror said with a laugh, then took his leave. Rosmerta clacked up the stairs in shiny heels, and Cyrus closed the door. "You need to learn to control your temper, Sirius," Cyrus said. "Control my temper?" Sirius's expression was one of pure outrage. "I must have been blind. I should have smelled the traitor on him ages ago. Do you know, we even suspected Remus. We thought he might be untrustworthy." He ranted until the fury drained out of him. It was one thing to be furious, another to hurt Pettigrew, and Sirius seemed to realize he wouldn't harm a hair on the traitor's head. At last he fell quiet. Cyrus glanced out the window. Night had fallen over Hogsmeade. Dark clouds smothered the sky, not a star in sight. The town looked like a place bracing itself for a returning shadow. Night also swallowed the dark jungle of Albania. From the depths of the forest, a stumbling dark wizard emerged in an odd, puppet-like gait. His eyes were vacant, his movements hollow. A double image seemed to waver across his features. In his hand, he clutched an old newspaper from over a month ago. Rita Skeeter's headline, screaming from the front page, "The second escapee. Is Azkaban really as safe as we imagine?" The man swayed and let out a hoarse, disbelieving whisper. "He's resurrected. 114. Dumbledore's temptation. You've begun to act, Tom. Let me see if the two of you are truly the same person." Dumbledore set the envelope down and slowly leaned back in his chair. The phoenix preened its brilliant feathers on the table. People called Albus Dumbledore the greatest wizard of his age, yet sometimes he felt he might be the man with the deepest sins. The two most terrifying dark wizards to appear in the last century were both connected to him. Perhaps, even without Dumbledore, Gellert Grindelwald and Lord Voldemort would have taken similar paths. But without someone to stop them, the world would have been far worse. Grindelwald might have reshaped both the wizarding and muggle worlds, dragging them into war. Grindelwald valued ability above all. He might have spotted a talented young Tom Riddle and taken him as a successor. Or they could have gone to opposite extremes. Either way, it would have been a bloody future. Dumbledore felt wariness gather at the edges of his thoughts, his mind still replaying the events of the past 2 school years. He had several pressing doubts that demanded answers. The first was whether the resurrected Tom Riddle was truly Lord Voldemort. If so, did their existences conflict? If not, then who or what was he? After Cyrus's escape from prison, or more precisely, his rebirth, Dumbledore had deliberately let the story leak into Albania and into the ears of Lord Voldemort, who was more like a presence than a living thing. He needed to know. His second doubt assumed Cyrus and Tom were not the same man. Was this Cyrus dangerous? Dumbledore did not want a third terrifying dark wizard rising. The third doubt, perhaps more of a hope, was this. If Voldemort learned that one of his Horcruxes had resurrected, would he try to recover it? If he did, he might make a mistake, a flaw Dumbledore could exploit. Tom, who calls himself Cyrus, went to Riddle Manor and the gaunt old house after his resurrection, Dumbledore murmured. He wouldn't hide a Horcrux in a Muggle-occupied place like Riddle Manor. That would be beneath him. So it seems likely he took the Horcrux hidden at the Gaunt property. He paused. But the Ministry of Magic, would he hide a Horcrux there? He thought it unlikely. The Ministry was the symbol of power, something Voldemort might naturally project, but Voldemort despised the Ministry. He believed his own power far exceeded that of any institution. Besides, a busy place like the Ministry, with constant traffic, was hardly secure. "Cyrus, who exactly are you?" Dumbledore asked the empty room. "Dolores, who do you think the person meeting that goblin is?" Tonks asked, rubbing at her forehead. It was another slow day at the Hog's Head, and she was already bored of the stakeout. Cyrus had been sharing the watch with her for over half a month. The Aurors and the Dementor had relaxed their vigilance. The goblin who camped in the bar every day continued to sit there, waiting for someone who might never arrive. Tonks had been reshaping her appearance constantly to avoid being recognized. Cyrus, by contrast, shirked the dull job of standing guard with every excuse he could invent. "I'm not good at transfiguration," he'd say, and wander off, driving Tonks to distraction. "No matter who he is, or if he even exists, this is our assignment. Do it properly." Tonks scolded as Cyrus slipped away. "How dare you? Who's been sneaking off to the Three Broomsticks every day to see Rosmerta? Be careful, I'll write to your wife, she added, half indignant and half teasing. I'm not going to see the landlady, I just don't want to eat among flies. Besides, my wife and I are on excellent terms. I bought her a Kneasel a few days ago. Cyrus called without looking back, knowing full well he hadn't bought a Kneasel. The animal he'd given was, in truth, the result of an earlier set of disguises. Dolores had been involved at the time. Cyrus had once transformed Dolores into a python. Dolores had slipped away, and later Cyrus had spent time tracking her down and turning her into a cat to give to his wife. His impersonation of Dolores had not been intended to break up another family. It was only to locate the key to the 12 vaults. He stretched and walked out of the Hogshead, avoiding the main street of Hogsmeade and heading toward a quieter part of town. The Shrieking Shack stood there, infamous across the British wizarding world. Cyrus had fought Dumbledore there months ago, had been defeated, and the shack had been damaged. Dumbledore had since repaired it, its outward appearance unchanged if you didn't look too closely. Inside, there were signs of life, proof that a werewolf had returned, but this time the house bore no new scars. Something tugged at Cyrus, a desire to go back to Hogwarts and see more, but he worried about the Marauder's map. He didn't know whether Dumbledore possessed it or whether Dumbledore would kill him if they met again. Even if his body no longer held Voldemort's soul, death was still a terrifying prospect for a young life like Cyrus's. He had poured so much into being resurrected, he had no wish to throw it away now. In the end, he turned back. He walked into the Hogshead and found no sign of Tonks. The goblin who sat faithfully in the corner was gone as well. Cyrus realized at once that whoever the goblin had been waiting for must have arrived, and Tonks had likely followed. Aberforth's action confirmed his suspicion. The bar's owner appeared beside him and tossed over a scrap of paper, folded several times. "That girl left it for you. I think she's in danger," Aberforth grumbled. Cyrus unfolded the note at once. "Dolores, the person the goblin was waiting for has appeared. It's a wizard. I have to follow him. I left you a trail. See you later." "When did this happen?" Cyrus asked, folding the note carefully and setting his expression into something sharp and focused. "After lunch, about 5 hours ago," Aberforth replied, brushing his hands. "You better hurry. That kid can't handle them on his own." Cyrus didn't need more urging. He wouldn't let Tonks get hurt. He burst through the weathered door and waved his wand in front of him. Hominum revelio. A golden mist spread outward, and within the shimmering haze, a line of footprints stretched away into the distance. 115. Avada Kedavra. A few hours earlier, Tonks sat at a table in the Pig's Head, gnawing on Aberforth's strangely hygienic secret recipe, grilled ribs, and fuming at Cyrus in her head. "Damn Dolores, making me stake out again," she muttered. She had never hated being a metamorphomagus as much as she did right now. "I want to go out and wander. Haven't been to Hogsmeade since graduation." She hacked at the ribs with knife and fork and shoved another mouthful in, chewing as if she were cutting Cyrus himself to pieces. She planned to slip out for a walk after the meal. The goblins stayed in the pub day after day and rarely went anywhere, and Cyrus usually didn't come back until night. Then the door opened and a wrapped wizard pushed inside. The way he glanced round and walked straight for the goblin put Tonks immediately on edge. He was very tall and very thin. He sat opposite the goblin, ordered a fire whiskey without much fuss, and asked, "Been waiting long?" "Been waiting long," the goblin snapped. Tonks could hear the heat behind his words. "I've been here for over a month. Do you ask me that? If you're not going to cooperate, get out of my sight. But mark my words, you'll pay for making a mockery of us." "Don't be angry, sir." The newcomer chuckled. His voice was low but arrogant. "Cooperating with your kind carries risk. It needs to be considered. There are different voices in the organization. Most think there's no point in working with you. After all, the great Goblin Landloke's treasures have been gone a long time, and you lot are greedy." He sneered inwardly. "We're greedy," the goblin spat. "You wizards took so many of our artifacts. We supplied the materials and paid for the crafting," the wizard cut in. "Ownership belongs to the maker," the goblin growled through clenched teeth, and Tonks imagined his rapt face twisting. "That's why we call you greedy." Tonks had heard enough of that argument before. Goblin-made pieces claimed by goblins, wands demanded without payment. She could feel the tension in the air. The tall wizard didn't try to win the debate. He and his associates wanted to use the goblins as a blade against the bloated ministry, not make friends. He tapped his wand, and the space around their table dimmed, their conversation muffled as if sealed under glass. Tonk's ears unconsciously twitched, a little metamorphogus reflex, but the dome made it impossible to follow what they were saying. After a while, the two rose. The mood between them had cooled. The tall wizard paid Aberforth, then he and the goblin left together. Tonks couldn't sit still. She chugged a gulp of butterbeer to wash down the ribs, wiped grease off her mouth with the back of her hand, and bolted to the door. She hesitated a second, fuming. "Damn, Dolores! Of all times!" She scribbled a quick note, tossed it onto the counter for Aberforth, and said, "If my companion comes back, show him this." The pub door creaked so loudly it made the other patrons flinch. "These young ones can't even drink in peace," an ancient wizard with no teeth grumbled and went back to his copy of the Quibbler. After Tonks left, Aberforth was still for a beat. He retreated into the kitchen. A faint silver light ghosted and then winked out like a lone star. Cyrus, a short while later, cast Hominum Revelio. He could track Tonks without any physical lead. Shimmering golden motes marked a clear set of footprints leading toward a more secluded lane. He followed them, slipping into verdant undergrowth, his figure narrowing and melting among the bushes. Not long after he went, several dark shapes slid into the trees behind him, wands ready. They weren't ordinary rogues. They moved like an organized band, clearly set on Cyrus and Tonks, two aurors from the ministry. The footprints led Cyrus to the end of the path, where the way forward was overrun. Brambles, dead leaves, the track vanished. The prince simply stopped, flew off, or apparated. Cyrus raised his wand, and, like a conductor restoring a frozen passage of music, coaxed the scene to replay. Images shimmered and unspooled before him. Two figures in black, one tall, one short, had walked this way a few hours earlier. The tall, thin wizard had tossed down a battered wand, as if handing over charity. The goblin looked displeased, but said nothing. "To the ruins," the tall wizard had murmured. Then he stretched, his body elongating and pinwheeling until he collapsed into a tiny black dot. Pop! A green light shot from that dot. Avada Kedavra! The curse of Avada Kedavra struck the illusory phantom like a bolt of green lightning, aiming straight for Cyrus's chest. The emerald light filled his vision. For a moment his heart froze. He couldn't tell illusion from reality. He stayed perfectly still until the spell hit the figure's chest. The puppet flew apart like a ragged, torn marionette and collapsed silently to the ground. 7 or 8 black-robed dark wizards stepped out of the shadows, moving slowly, surprised at how cleanly it had gone. "I thought this auror would be a problem," one of them said, "but that was far easier than I expected." "Humph. Anyone struck by Avada Kedavra dies, even Dumbledore would," another scoffed. "What's an auror worth to us?" He sneered. "Do the fools at the ministry really think we don't know they're watching us?" "What a pity," a third murmured. "If we'd needed more than one sacrifice, he might have lasted longer." "What about the body?" "Leave it. Let the ministry find their own mess." Another dark wizard laughed. They'd exposed nothing. It was a slap in the ministry's face, and the ministry still blamed goblins. "Let's go." They apparated all at once. The air crackled with the dry snap of disappearing magic, and the forest fell abruptly still. For a moment, everything seemed to hold its breath. Then a clear, piercing cry split the silence. The shriek of a golden eagle. The bird swooped down, and in a blink became Cyrus. The skin of the body on the ground tore open and went brown, sinking into the damp earth. The wizards had killed only a mud puppet Cyrus had made. He'd known he was being followed. The instant he entered the jungle, he'd used the blind spot in their sight to turn into an eagle and create a decoy. 7 or 8 dark wizards didn't worry him. The problem was time. Tonks had been missing too long, and Cyrus didn't know exactly where the dark wizards had apparated to. One small mistake, and he wouldn't have time to save her. That was why he'd staged this. Now he had a trail to follow. The apparition magic in the air still thrummed, and he only needed to track its residue. He closed his eyes and felt a sudden tug, as if something had hooked at his gut. The world spun and everything blurred. Damp air brushed his face. Wave sounds rolled and crashed around him. He shook his head to clear the dizziness. He was in a shallow sea cave, 2 or 3 meters deep, its mouth opening onto the sea. He stepped out into blinding light and the sharp, salty wind. Across from him, built into a cliff worn away by the ocean, stood the ruined tower he'd been searching for. The surf lashed against the rock, carving sea caves into the face of the cliff. The cave he'd risen from was one of them. Along the cliff there was a winding passage, and everywhere the stone bore the scars of age and violence. Wild, dry grass had taken hold. Much was broken, as if a battle had once raged here. This was the ruin from legacy that led to Gringotts, Cyrus realized. If anyone would have clues about ancient magic, it would be these people, and perhaps the goblins. There was almost no cover along the corridor to the tower. He could see the dark wizards who had tried to kill him had already gone some distance inside. Not wanting to alert them, Cyrus shifted into a golden eagle, rose over the cliff, and landed on a shattered stone pillar of the ruined tower. Below, an unconscious person lay bound on the stones. For a second, Cyrus was stunned. Then recognition hit. This was Tonks's human form. She was alive. She'd been careful. She'd changed shape before being tracked. Cyrus didn't reveal himself. He watched and listened, scanning for traces of ancient magic while eavesdropping on the dark wizards and the goblins. The tower was mostly gone. A few murals clung to surviving walls, depicting wonders of a long-past wizardry. The only intact feature was a statue of a wizard on the eastern platform, but it held no obvious secrets. According to Lanlok's records, the gate to ancient magic is hidden in these ruins, a goblin muttered, clutching a broken wand. It looked like a rotten twig save for a single strand of a magical creature's hair stuck in its damaged core. Ancient magic. The man in the center of the ruined tower sounded like a man hearing a favorite song. He wore a black robe and a mask of dull metal. Beneath it, his voice lost itself in something like rapture. Then he stiffened and barked, "Dokuro, how do I know you goblin brothers aren't deceiving us?" "Deception?" the goblin snapped back. "Only wizards deceive other wizards." Dokuro's tone was acidic. Then he barked a name. "Radovan Luke Wood, do you plan to break our agreement?" Radovan Luke Wood. Cyrus's head snapped. The name matched the surname he'd heard before. He studied the masked man's exposed lower face, lips and jawline that echoed the features of a certain forlorn Death Eater he'd once interrogated in Azkaban. This man must be from a different branch of the Lukewood family, one that hadn't followed Voldemort to ruin. "Don't worry," Radovan said, stepping to the center of the tower and spreading his arms. "There's no need to think so little of us. You goblins want wands, and I want access to ancient magic. Our goals don't conflict. They're perfectly aligned." He stood silhouetted against the sinking sun. The ocean glittered like a silver bowl below, and for a moment it seemed to fall away, then swell again, something like the moon lifting from the sea, a gathering of power poised to break. 117. Blood will guide the way. The sun slid toward the horizon, and the ocean at its edge looked like a vast field of gold, waves bending like ripened rice in a rising wind. The sky on the far side of the bay had been stained a wisteria hue that deepened as evening fell, until a pale yellow moon hung over a dim, cooling world. August had given way to the steady decline of autumn. It was nearly October. The sea air was sharp and cold. "It's time to begin the ritual," Luke Wood said, looking up into the moonlight. 9 black-robed wizards formed a ring on the cliff, and a comatose Tonks lay in the circle's center. The goblin stood a short distance away. Only now did he lower his hood, revealing a face that Cyrus judged ugly and coarse. Like most goblins, to Cyrus's eye, they shared a sameness of features and temperament. "Wake her up," Luke Wood ordered, tone flat. One of the dark wizards flicked his wand. A red spark struck Tonks, and she convulsed with a pained groan, consciousness returning sluggishly. Pain lingered over her movements, fear flared and was quickly tamped down. She had trained with Moody. She knew how to steady herself. She tried to look up. Night obscured most details. Silver moonlight washed everything in a veil. The crash of waves told her she was by the sea, but Britain had miles of coastline. She couldn't tell where. "Where is this?" she tried to ask, but the words came weak. Her limbs were bound with magically conjured ropes, tight enough that each attempt to struggle made her seem like a helpless, writhing thing. It was a pathetic sight, and Cyrus, perched on a broken stone pillar a little way off, allowed himself a small, private amusement. He had been there for hours, wings outstretched to shake off cramping and ready for whatever came. In that desolate place, the ruined cliffs and jagged rocks made his presence unsuspicious. An eagle perched on an outcrop fit the scene. The 9 dark wizards lowered their heads and began to chant. Cyrus could not have named those words. They sounded more like an old, wicked litany than ordinary spellwork. The bared power hidden in the tower nearby began to stir. He saw a cool blue light flare from a crystal set into the stone, a light like water that ran along engraved conduits until it coated the tower's flat, rune-carved face. The glow spread out over the circle, and Tonks weaving around them like a tide. A translucent barrier rose, its far side blurred as though seen through thick film. Upon it coiled a twisted emblem, a silvery wisp that looked like steam turned to sigil. Cyrus took everything in, the light, the barrier, the pattern. He could read something in that magic, an echo of the old primeval force he and a very few others called ancient magic. The dark wizards did not see it. They were merely instruments in the work, not its source. "Dokuro, you tricked me!" Luke Wood exploded. He loosed a curse. The goblin Dokuro was too far for surprise to be useful. He deflected the curse with a deft flick and snapped, "I told you, it's wizardry to deceive. Then you'd better explain why there's no reaction at all." Luke Wood snarled, "Or I'll have you and this auror die together." At his command, the other 8 wizards leveled their wands at Dokuro. Tonks, flat on her back in the grass, bit her lip and tried to keep from panicking. She wished, absurdly, that the 9 would turn on each other. Some scrap might give her a chance. But the odds were brutal, 9 against 1 goblin, and she had no wand, her hands bound. Resistance was a fantasy. She did not give up trying. Tonks was a metamorphmagus. Though she could not become wildly smaller or larger like an animagus, she could alter her features and the proportions of her body. She rolled onto her back and curled one wrist behind her. With concentration, she thinned her forearms, flexing shoulders and squeezing until she felt fabric loosen where the ropes bit. A small chance, but a chance. In the dark, only Cyrus had a clear view of those subtle adjustments. Dokuro let the taunt hang between them, contempt sharpening his voice. "You can't see it because you don't have the talent," he sneered. "Very few are favored by ancient magic. The difference between them and you is like the difference between wizards and muggles." The wizards bristled. "You dare call us muggles?" One spat. "You're nothing but a filthy goblin, and you speak to us like that?" Another shouted. Their faces flushed, ranks that had stood high now flamed with outrage. Praising bloodlines of any kind had always bred arrogance in them. Cyrus knew the type, but Dokuro did not press the point. Some insults deserved no echo. "That's why I asked you to prepare a sacrifice," Dokuro said calmly, and his eyes slid over to Tonks from beneath his heavy lids. "Perhaps blood can show you the way." The statement hung in the air like a blade. The blue light on the tower pulsed as though hearing the promise of it, and the emblem on the barrier seemed to writhe, waiting to be fed. Chapter 118, More Cruel Than the Enemy, Are the Same Kind. Tonks had just managed to untie the ropes at her wrists and was working out how to free the bindings around her torso when the despicable goblin shifted the dark wizard's attention onto her. She dared not make any rash moves. "Cut her throat and spread her blood on the floor. The fresh blood will reveal traces of ancient magic," Dokuro said, grinning. It was a method Lon Locke had recorded in his manuscript, because the ancient magic couldn't be seen with the naked eye. Another color would be used to outline its traces, and a wizard's fresh blood was the most suitable dye. Cyrus felt a cold shock, not from the goblin's cruelty, but because Luke Wood and his followers accepted the plan without hesitation, as if such savagery were ordinary. Sometimes your own kind can be worse than any enemy. One of the dark wizards stepped forward, wand raised. "Avada!" Luke Wood grabbed his arm, stopping the killing curse. "You can't kill her straight away. The blood won't run. We need her alive so we can drain every drop." He produced a short knife from his sleeve. Cyrus had been surprised a moment before to see a wizard reach for a blade, but the runes etched along its edge made it clear this was an alchemical weapon, inscribed with some special magic. Luke Wood hauled Tonks up by the collar. The blade went for her throat. If she died, not even a time turner could save her now. Cyrus dove. He fell like a shadow across the night sky, his claws like knives tearing into Luke Wood's forearm. "Ah!" the wizard screamed as Cyrus knocked him back. The dagger skittered from his grip and clattered to the ground. Blood spurted from the wound, the white of bone stark against it. A drop hit the ruined flagstones and, as the goblin had promised, stained the faint glow of ancient magic from blue to red, only no one was paying attention now. The dark wizards, Dokuro included, had already raised their wands. Spell after spell screamed toward Cyrus. Dazzling crimson light flashed and died as curses whizzed past him. Luke Wood, cursing, poured a bottle of dittany over his shredded hand and hissed, "Shoot down that eagle!" Cyrus strafed through the night, dodging dense volleys. Tonks, stunned, recognized him at once. Although she'd never seen Cyrus in human form before, it was her chance. She shrank herself one size, easing the ropes around her torso until they slipped free. Unbound, she lunged for the nearest wizard, trying to snatch his wand, but he yelled and drew the other's attention. Luke Wood would not let his prize escape. He re-aimed and shouted, "Stupefy." He underestimated Tonks. Trained by a legendary auror, Tonks knew how to fight without a wand. That was a required skill for aurors. As the stunning spell hurtled toward her, she moved without thinking, slipping behind the dark wizard she'd grabbed and using him as a shield. The spell struck him full on. Tonks wrenched his wand free, rolled clear of the collapsing stone, ducked a couple of stray curses, and raised the wand to face Luke Wood. Expelliarmus! Another wizard's counterspell spoiled the disarm. The rest of the dark wizards and Dokuro abandoned Cyrus and concentrated on Tonks. They had not yet realized the eagle in the sky was an animagus. To them it was merely an eagle with a magical animal lineage Tonks had retained. Overwhelmed, she took cover behind the crumbling tower, but the dark wizard's curses hit like grenades. Shards of stone flew, and the ancient masonry began to fall apart. Most aurors could defend themselves against a few dark wizards, but a group like this, old purebloods with deep family magic, was a different matter. Tonks, still inexperienced by comparison, was being pressed hard. Cyrus slid down silently and landed on a tall stone pillar, wings folding. The moonlight silvered his hair. The night wrapped around him. He planted the tip of his wand into the column. Instantly, a weight descended on the gathered dark wizards, like several trolls piled on their shoulders. Knees buckled, breath left their lungs, and one by one they collapsed, prostrate on the stones. Tonks looked up. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw Tom Riddle. She had braced herself for the arrival of Dolores or some familiar rescuer, and instead a stranger stood framed against the moon. The figure had changed from the descriptions she'd heard. His pupils glowed gold, lending him a terrible majesty. He was so overwhelmingly powerful that she felt, for the first time, genuinely intimidated. If the man before her could so easily lay low so many dark wizards, perhaps not even Dumbledore or Alastor Moody would have managed it. "Tom Riddle," she breathed, confusion and fear curling in her voice. "Good evening, everyone," Cyrus said with an oddly polite tone, an almost formal calm that felt unsettling given the situation. "Who are you?" Luke Wood rasped, trying to raise his head. He was raging. Being clawed by an animal was one thing, but one thing had followed another until now a strange, powerful wizard had appeared and left them flattened in the dust. "My name is Cyrus," the newcomer replied. He drifted down from the pillar like a feather. Walking through the ruined towers, Cyrus stepped over the prostrate bodies and came to the transparent gate that shimmered with ancient magic. Through that gateway, the outline of Gringotts loomed faintly. Cyrus didn't need to test the emblem to know his spell could light it and teleport him straight to the bank. But without the key to Vault 12, getting to Gringotts would be pointless unless he intended to break in. A grin flickered across his face. If Voldemort had once broken into Gringotts, why couldn't Cyrus? Cyrus had never cared for the goblins. Even if Gringotts burned to the ground, it would not trouble him. What right did a horde of inherently greedy goblins, the losers of the Goblin rebellions, have to run the wizarding economy? The defeated should know their place and serve the wizards. Those goblins, however, had come to see themselves as masters of wealth. Cyrus would take back what belonged to the wizards, sooner or later. Getting into Gringotts was not the hard part. Vault 12 would be another matter. It was sealed with ancient magics, older than goblin rule at the bank. He stopped and looked at the dark wizards prostrate on the floor and the goblin, Dokuro, bowing low. These people clearly knew things about ancient magic. Obtaining it was why they were here, especially that manuscript supposedly by Lan Lok. He waved his wand lazily. A broken slab of stone folded itself into an elegant, soft sofa. Cyrus crossed his legs and sank into it, looking down at the cowering figures. "I hear you're looking for ancient magic," he said, voice silky. "I happen to be interested too. Why don't you tell me what you know?" He paused, then, with a mock bow. "Sorry, I suppose I should say please." Luke Wood nearly choked. He wanted to curse, but dared not. He felt like a flobberworm on someone else's cutting board, utterly at someone else's mercy. Tonks, however, stepped forward, 2 hands on her wand, as if it were a gun. "Surrender, Tom Riddle," she barked. She was visibly shaking. Even though Cyrus was the one being pointed at, Tonks was the one drenched in sweat, breath coming quickly, heart banging against her ribs. The fugitive sat calmly, but his presence pressed on her more heavily than the previous skirmish had. Her hands trembled. "I forgot about you," Cyrus said, eyes suddenly settling on her. The sensation hit Tonks like a blast of fire. Her soul felt scorched. She tried to cast, but the moment the tip of her wand flared, her mind seized in pain, and she collapsed, unconscious. Cyrus reached out and sent a current through her, less a spell than a snap of electricity, rendering her limp. Magic that could be used without a wand, at will, was so much easier than wine and wandly things. The dark wizards around him reeled inwardly. Silent casting was one thing. Casting without a wand, and without a gesture, was another. What kind of wizard was this? Tom Riddle? Luke Wood had heard the name, the other famous Azkaban escapee alongside Sirius Black, but he had never believed Riddle could be so powerful. In Luke's memory, Riddle had been more a legacy claimant than a murderer. Now, faced with this man, even the old terrors of the Dark Lord seemed a pale comparison. Magic was power. Against overwhelming force, their pure-blood pride shattered. Suppressed, Luke Wood's resistance crumbled. Dokuro, meanwhile, had his face pressed to the floor, but his eyes burned with venom. He fumbled for a small silver whistle at his collar and brought it to his lips. Then no sound came from it. "I only found some records about ancient magic in my family archives," Luke blurted. "If you want them, I'll give everything." His obsequiousness made Dokuro spit contempt. What pure-blood glories, what hollow honor, Dokuro thought. If Luke weren't pinned by Cyrus's power, he would already be crawling at Cyrus's feet. It was not an idle insult. Many pure bloods had sputtered and slithered under the new regime. Dokuro's disgust was deep. "Show me, Mr. Luke Wood," Cyrus said quietly. He eased the pressure of his magic off the man. Luke felt a weight lift from his shoulders, as if a family burden of a generation had been set down. The relief was intoxicating, and it brought something else with it. The old urge to fight rose again. Luke sized up his chances. Cyrus was only one man. Even if he was powerful, could he withstand an Avada Kedavra? A memory of Cyrus's mightful posture had made Luke think of the Dark Lord, but looking now at Tonks lying unconscious and noticing Cyrus had not disarmed him, Luke felt no sense of awe, only opportunity. He stepped closer, curling his hand around his wand, planning a single, decisive strike from behind. "If you need it," he said, edging nearer, "my ancestor, Charles Luke Wood, was once a guardian of ancient magic. But the line, it's been nearly severed. I'm afraid there aren't many records left. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had to work with the goblins." The regret on his face looked sincere. In truth, Luke had stumbled across certain scraps by accident. He moved deliberately, keeping his eyes on Cyrus while his free hand inched back to his wand. He needed to end this in one move. "You don't have much, then?" Cyrus asked, amused. "No." Luke leaned in, voice low. "But that goblin, this lowly goblin, he found the manuscript of the great goblin Lan Lok. That manuscript records the secrets to mastering ancient magic. If you could get it." Dokuro's eyes bulged. "Traitor!" A hoarse voice spat. "You traitor, Luke Wood! Treacherous, breaking faith!" A chorus of fury swelled, but then Luke silenced them. His wand flashed a silencing charm at Dokuro. The goblin could open his mouth, but not make a sound, his face twisted in impotent curses. "What do you know? One must follow the strong to walk the right path," Luke declared, his gaze never leaving Cyrus. Part warning, part plea, part threat. He needed Cyrus distracted just long enough to strike. Cyrus rose and passed by him as Luke had planned. The man's back was briefly exposed as he moved toward Dokuro, who remained kneeling. Luke drew a deep breath and let his wand come up. A green lightning braided along the tip, humming with deadly intent. 120. Dragon, Mr. Luke Wood. Luke froze with his wand half raised. He had the killing curse on his lips when Cyrus's voice cut through the night. Do you think your curse will be quicker than my speed in killing you? The mocking tone made Luke's breath stop. His hand shook so badly the wand trembled, yet he didn't lower it. The wind off the coast seemed to hold its breath. Even the waves stilled. In that suspended instant, everything outside his skull vaporized. Only his racing thoughts remained. The motionless figure before him seemed to slow until it was nearly a still life. He couldn't see Cyrus's face. He could only imagine the man's indifference. Killing him would take only a moment. So quick. The desire to seize the moment pulsed in Luke's head like a monstrous hand forcing his arm forward. Luke had never been brilliant, never destined to inherit the Luke Wood name. He'd failed to rise among the Death Eaters, escaped being branded with the Dark Mark, and only after Augustus, his elder brother, had been taken to Azkaban following you-know-who's fall, did Luke become the family's heir. He'd also stumbled on the secret of ancient magic his ancestors had left behind. If he could take that power for himself, his life would change. He would stop trailing behind others and become the one in front. One spell, he told himself. One spell. But what if it missed? What if he failed? The thought of being hunted forever for trying to kill someone, a killing curse against a man like Cyrus, made his fingers quake. Still, some fierce, hungry part of him would not let his arm drop. The curse took shape. At such close range, the green light painted the sea. Even knowing it was coming, who could dodge it? Then, impossibly, Cyrus turned his head. Luke's throat clenched and the spell almost fell apart. The Avada shot from his wand in a ragged arc and wrapped around Cyrus like a ribbon of sickly green. Cyrus, unhurried, simply raised his wand and deflected it. The killing curse burst into a spray of green sparks and fell harmlessly into the ocean. Luke crumpled to the stone, stunned, as if the ground had ripped out from under his beliefs. You blocked the Avada Kedavra. The killing curse was feared because it had no counter, because without extraordinary intent, it was hollow. Even in legends, Voldemort's supporters knew intent mattered. A half-hearted curse could barely wound. Luke's killing intent had vanished when Cyrus had looked at him. Fear had replaced murder, and without that fire, the curse was an empty shell. You call that an Avada Kedavra? Cyrus asked, amused. His voice was colder than the sea. He had no intention of letting anyone else live, except, oddly, Tonks. The dark wizards present had already thrown curses at him. The goblin who wanted ancient magic was not innocent either. Cyrus didn't delight in killing, but he had no qualms about cleansing rot. He moved his wand in a small, merciless arc. Flame blossomed from Luke's body as if summoned by a hungry thing. The fire licked and twisted, becoming serpents that slid into his eye sockets and tore inward, burning him from the inside out. The other dark wizards watched in horror as the blaze finished him. The flames did not flicker out with his death. They spread, sweeping around the base of the lighthouse and turning men into cinders, twisted husks of what they'd been. Smoke took their shapes and vanished. Tonks and the others fell still. Only Cyrus walked through the inferno unscathed. Cyrus left one man alive, Dokuro. Luke's death had broken the silencing charm that had held Dokuro mute. The goblin, however, showed a stubbornness bigger than his frame. Dying, he still refused to surrender a single secret. Cyrus had little patience for goblin greed. They had fought with wizards for rights and privileges, demanded wizarding secrets like the wand-making craft while hoarding their own, and then had the audacity to demand more. Their hypocrisy made him sick. Yet Dokuro's defiance earned a grudging respect. It was rarer than the contempt Cyrus felt for other people. Dokuro spat. Never. You made a deal with Luke Wood, Cyrus said, crouching so he was near the goblin's face. Why not make the same deal with me? I am stronger than he was. From your side, it's just a change of collaborator. A contemptuous laugh shook Dokuro. The difference was everything. They hadn't planned to hand over the manuscript willingly. If Lanlok's notes on ancient magic were truly as potent as rumored, No sane goblin would give them away. The plan had been to use Luke to get their hands on the wands he'd promised, then kill him and take both the wands and the notes. Betrayal had been part of the bargain from the beginning. Cyrus's sudden arrival had upset those calculations. Now the goblin's position was precarious. Better to run than to trust this new power. Cyrus waved. The dead wands of the dark wizards lifted and drifted toward Dokuro, a neat, menacing row. "It's only a change in partners," he said. "It should mean nothing to you." Dokuro's face tightened. He did not flinch. "You think we plan to give it up? You think Luke's death makes any difference?" Heat in Cyrus's eyes flickered at the insolence. He disliked this species' thinly veiled greed, but he disliked human duplicity more. Yet the goblin's stubbornness had limits. Cyrus felt for a moment the small, practical urge of negotiation, information for life. But Dokuro refused. The goblin's refusal, however, was not the end of the story. Dokuro lifted his head and, with a grin that was all teeth and malice, shouted into the black night, "Then burn with us." At once, the tower shuddered. The cliffside lighthouse, perched alone by the sea, began to tremble, as if the rock itself groaned in pain. A gigantic shadow swallowed the moon, huge and wet with scale and smoke. Cyrus turned his head and saw the shape split the silver sky. A dragon, fully grown and terrible, unfurled above them. It opened a mouth of living furnace, and from it poured a waterfall of fire. The flames fell like liquid lava, pouring over the tower and roaring toward the sea, engulfing everything in a sheet of burning heat.